Welcome. Good to see you here. There's a few people kind of coming in. It's right at 4 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Our topic this month is not forgetting the freezer. So we'll talk all about the freezer. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. I cannot see you or hear you since we're in webinar mode, but I will check that Q&A box occasionally. The chat is disabled, just so I can just focus on the Q&A box. And yeah, feel free to put some comments in there or some questions. My name is Megan Ellison. I'm a registered dietitian nutritionist, also a certified diabetes care and education specialist. So those are my credentials there. Hopefully you guys can see the screen. Will you go ahead and put in the Q&A yes or no, just if you can see this, see my slides. It looks a little different to me than typical, so just want to make sure. Yes, okay, thank you. Fantastic. I think I need to get out of this mode that I'm in. Let me share my screen again because it's not allowing me to advance the slides. Here we go. Great. Thank you to our sponsor, Stilly Valley Health Connections. That's who you registered with. They're up in Snohomish County in Hospital District number 3 in that Arlington, Smoky Valley area. And I know I see some familiar names here. So some of you I think I've actually seen at classes in person at the Stilly Valley Teaching Kitchen. If you haven't been to the kitchen, I would highly recommend taking in one of our food demos in the future. We do those monthly, and that's a lot of fun because you get to like interact and ask questions live, and you get to try some samples. And there's nothing quite like being, in person with everybody. But I'm glad that you're here virtually. We are recording this session, so for those who couldn't make it today, they'll get to see it, and you guys will also get this recording afterwards. And I will also be sending you the slides and some recipes, some things to think about for your freezer, just to maybe expand your palate a little bit or expand what is going in your freezer. So let's talk about the nutrition benefits, reducing food waste, maybe a few less common uses of your freezer, tips for packing as far as like when you're putting things into the freezer, deep freezer use in general, some tips for that and some stats on that. Some of my freezer favorites, I'll share those with you. And then I'll send you some recipe ideas as well. Okay, so, right off the bat, from a nutrition perspective, I know a lot of my patients that come in that are trying to eat healthy and trying to, make really good choices are often confused about fresh versus frozen, with the idea that fresh is best, which we actually know is not necessarily the case. From a nutrition sense, the freezing process itself helps in several ways. One is it's helping to maintain food safety, and food safety is like, right off the bat, something we all should be thinking about. It slows down the spoilage from microbes like bacteria and yeast. It also slows down the natural respiration of the plant, for example, like if you're putting in broccoli or apple slices or whatever it is, slows down that respiration, that gas exchange that happens with the plant. And it also, the cold temperatures deactivate many natural enzymes that would be breaking down the plant internally. So just like when, like let's say that when we're fasting, for example, we go for a while without having nutrition. When that plant is picked or harvested, taken away from its source of nutrition, And it's, basically either traveling or, hopefully it's a traveling a very short period of time and like getting frozen right away, ideally. But anytime that you have basically harvested the produce or even, our animal products, the enzyme process of breaking down those nutrients internally starts right away. And so if you can get that produce or that item frozen as quickly as possible, you slow down that enzyme production and the breakdown internally. And so that will preserve some nutrients, like for example, vitamin C. And so we know that freezing helps to maintain the nutrients, but also a lot of our frozen foods start off more nutritionally dense in the first place because they are allowed to ripen longer. They're picked at peak ripeness. So they're already starting out kind of ahead of the curve and then preserved quickly to maintain those nutrients. So for example, I always use broccoli as an example because the vitamin C in like fresh broccoli is oftentimes less than our frozen because freezing preserves vitamin C content. So our fresh sometimes may actually not be as nutritious as our frozen. The one caveat with that is like we're coming into farmers market season. If you're buying local from your farmers that, just came over the pass or are from Skagit Valley or something like that, where, they've picked that produce that morning and you're cooking it and eating it later that day, you're getting, as much nutrients as you possibly can. So that's a great way to go too, or getting it from the farmer and freezing it yourself, which we'll talk about in just a little bit here. The other aspect is that freezing can help reduce on food waste and stretch your food dollars. So from a nutrition sense, if you have more food dollars to spend on nutritious food because you're utilizing the freezer and making those dollars go a little further, that's really supportive of your overall health. And of course, freezing expands our nutrient variety across the year. It was only a little over 100 years ago where we had to eat very, very seasonally. We did not have freezer options. It wasn't until, the late 1800s, early 1900s that, freezing really became a viable option. I'm actually reading this book right now called Frostbite that is all about the industrial complex of how this came about and our giant industry that we have now for freezing foods and the global expansion of that. We're pretty lucky nowadays where we can pretty much eat whatever we want year round, and it didn't used to be like that just a little over 100 years ago. So from a nutrient sense, we have a lot of options these days, which is great. Let me just check the Q&A. I'm going to clear these two. Great. Okay. So very nutritious options in the freezer. So here are some of the common things that I think about when we're thinking about what's in the freezer. But go ahead and put in the Q&A like something that's in your freezer. Like what's a common thing that's in your freezer? Go ahead and share that with the group. So I think about whole foods like meats, fish, and poultry. Whole foods like vegetables and fruits. Now, a lot of these, they are semi-prepped in the sense that like, maybe they're made into steaks or maybe they're made into fillets or maybe it's like chicken breasts. So there has been some prep there, but it's a whole food item. You know what it is. It is just that thing. Same thing with the fruits and vegetables. When you look at the ingredient list, ideally it would just say broccoli, not broccoli and a bunch of other stuff in there. You can find, of course, those things that are like broccoli and cheese sauce. So, maybe that is appropriate sometimes. But I love the fact that we really can go to the freezer aisle these days and just find just the fruits or just the vegetables. And that's a little bit different than our canning has been in the past. So typically canning, you've needed to add salt or sugar to it. We have some processes now where we can actually like can without those preservatives, which is nice. But with the freezing, you really don't need those things because it's really the cold that is providing the preservation there. So, when you're looking at your labels, it should just say like peas, not peas and a bunch of extra preservatives. Okay, so Emily says we have nuts and extra loaves of bread. Yes, I love that. That's actually on my next slide of less common things in the freezer. So you're already ahead of the curve with the nuts and the bread in the freezer, especially here in the Northwest where our breads tend to get kind of moldy quickly. That's a great idea for just drying it out a little bit. Okay, of course we have prepared meals. A lot of times this is what we first think of because we have so many options nowadays at the grocery store. Things like pizza, lasagna, frozen dinners. I will say, don't write them all off immediately. A lot of times people are saying, oh, that's not, it's an unhealthy food. But actually, a lot of those are just based on like the ingredients that you would put into a meal, a similar meal, like if you were going to make lasagna, for example. And actually, with some of the frozen dinners out there, like there's some really good choices that are, when you look at the ingredients, it is just, the whole food ingredients in there. And it's portion controlled. It's well balanced as far as carbs, protein, and vegetables. It's, the right size for a lot of people. It can be very convenient. And when you compare that to something like eating out, it can be not only like a better deal nutrition wise, but wallet wise for sure. So, look for some of those healthier options for frozen dinners if you're in that era of life where you need a plan B that is a quick, ready to go option. You can also make your own, right? Like your own leftovers can go into the freezer in little individual containers. And then, that's even better, even cheaper. And you get to control what goes into that. But don't feel bad about some of those options. Like, for example, I think of the brands like Kashi, that is based on whole plant ingredients. Healthy Choice steamer bowls, those are done really well. Even things like, lean cuisine, for example, portion controlled, it's macronutrient paired. You've got some color, some vegetables in there. So there are some brands that are doing a good job. And then, of course, we have things like treats, ice cream, popsicles, frozen yogurts. Some of my patients will actually take their little yogurt cups, like their, Chobani or whatever they're enjoying, and stick it in the freezer and have it like a ice cream treat at night. So that's kind of fun. Okay. So some less common freezer foods, things to think about if you're not already using the freezer for these things. Consider, if you have the space, putting some of these items in your freezer because it will help with preservation and making those things last a little longer. So anything that has a germ or anything that has a lot of fat in it. So for example, nuts and seeds, because of the fat content, can go rancid over time. Like I think about ground flax and chia, some of these soluble fibers that have the really heart healthy omega-3 fats in them that a lot of my patients are adding to kind of bump up their fiber and their nutrition intake. But because they have those omega-3s, there is that potential for those fats to go rancid over time. And we tend to use like little bits at a time. So we're not really going through maybe that bulk. Maybe you got in the bulk section or you got like the bag of the baking ground flax. So it might take a while to get through it. So just keep it in the freezer. You can add it frozen to anything. So that's a good option for your nuts and seeds. Grains, especially whole grains, when it still has the germ there. So it has that, heart healthy fats in the germ, like a brown rice, for example. Even some people even put beans and lentils, like just dry beans and lentils in the freezer, or once they're cooked, put them in the freezer for use in like future casseroles or soups, things like that. Flours, if you're not going through your ground flours on a regular basis, especially if it is a whole wheat flour, so it's got that germ, it's got the fats in it, or like flours like almond flour, for example, that naturally has some fat there, you do want to consider the freezer because it'll make that last a lot longer. And just check, you can open up your flour bag, smell the flours, just like you would smell oils if it's been a while since you've used the oils. Just make sure that it smells fresh, doesn't smell off, rancid, musty. It should have like a fresh smell to it. And then I love to just throw the whole banana in the freezer. So leave the skin on. You don't have to peel it. You don't have to cut it or do anything. You can literally just like, when it gets to the point of the amount of spots where you're like, okay, I'm not going to eat this fresh, stick it in the freezer. The whole peel will turn dark brown or kind of black, but the inside is totally fine. And then when you want to go use it for a smoothie or for banana bread, you just run it under hot water and that peel will come right off. It's already in its own little package, so you don't need, to package it extra. Okay, planned overs, instead of leftovers, maybe you truly are like planning on having extras. So this is a great place to think about like making those little individual freezer meals for yourself. I would use some glass containers. So if you don't have any glass containers with those good fitting lids, maybe invest in that. Sauces and soups work really well as leftovers because you can make a big batch of it and then freeze it in little individual portions for the future. And then you're not getting tired of, eating that same thing all the time in one go. Even things like batched cooked grains, beans, other proteins like frozen, like grilled chicken breasts that you then freeze, for example. Those can be nice options. In fact, nowadays in the freezer section, you can find basically like ready to go rices, like brown rice, and ready to go other grains that are par cooked, where they've been steamed, dried, and then you just like finish the cooking, like that last little 90 seconds to 2 minutes in the microwave or on a stovetop. And those come out really, really delicious and they're fast compared to like taking 45 minutes to cook brown rice, for example. So yeah, maybe get some glass containers, plan for some landovers. And then I like to think about the freezer for those little things where you're like, oh, I just have an extra little bit of this. Like, let's say that you've got a lime that's starting to get a little shriveled. You're not going to use it in the next few days. Go ahead and zest it, juice it, put that in like a ice cube tray and just freeze it as a whole thing. Or sometimes I'll just put the zest in a little Ziploc bag. So then for the future, when I'm inevitably out of limes and I need some zest or I need a little pizzazz, then I've got that ready to go. Same thing with like your herbs and greens. Like my mother-in-law will often blanch her extra kale from the garden. She'll just blanch it, chop it, and pack it in either water or just pack it in a Ziploc bag in the freezer, and then you can just take out however much you need at a time. Garlic and ginger are really great frozen as well. So if you have a bunch of garlic or you have a bunch of ginger and it's starting to get a little dehydrated, just go ahead and mince it, throw it in a Ziploc bag or like a little container, get it in the freezer, and then you'll have that for the future when you're doing your cooking. Check the Q&A. If you guys have any other ideas for kind of less common things in the freezer, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. You can pack some of these things with water or with oil as well. Like if you're doing the ice cube tray method, sometimes I'll pack a bunch of like herbs in them and then actually use olive oil. You freeze them then as individual little cubes and then pop them out and throw them in a Ziploc bag. So you have your ice cube tray for future use for something else. And then it's basically like, your oil and your start to a soup or a casserole or a dish. So you just take one of those, throw it in your pan and it, melts and you're basically cooking your garlic, your ginger, your herbs, all right there in the olive oil you used. Okay. Freezing berries. So let's talk about how to do some of your individual produce. And the reason I highlighted berries is because we have the free blackberries all over the Pacific Northwest here. This is one of my favorite things to do in around August time when the berries start ripening. And the berries ripen at a gradual pace. So you may have noticed that like on the vines, the ends will start ripening first, and then the next berries, and then the next, and then the next. So it is usually over a several week period that you can be doing some harvesting of the berries. So we like to just like go out after work for 15 minutes, do some picking, and then freeze, that batch for the night and just repeat that process for, several days over the week for several weeks. Of course, you can do this with purchased berries as well. Like if you have a sale or you're going to a farmer's market and you're getting a lot all at one time, you do want to wash them. You want to get rid of like sticks and bugs and debris. But the caveat being like you also want to get them dry. So rinse or even like possibly soak, depending on what kind of berry, like your blueberries, you could actually soak them a little bit. And then I like to put them through a strainer, like one of those metal mesh strainers. And then also I will dump them out onto a towel in a sheet pan and kind of roll them around in a towel to get them dry before then putting them onto a sheet pan that has parchment paper so that they don't stick to the bottom. And you really want to have plenty of space on that pan or whatever you're using so that they're not all clumping together, because you want them to freeze individually. So basically you can scoop them up frozen and put them into a freezer bag, like transfer them into a bag that will store better, or even into like a jar that you can pour, or like a plastic container. But you don't want them all clumped together. So the individual freezing is a big deal. So whether it's strawberries or blackberries or blueberries or raspberries, just get them dry enough where they're not going to like totally stick to that parchment paper, and they're separated from each other so that they can dry individually and freeze individually. And you can do that same thing with other produce too, like, green beans, for example. Okay, so speaking of freezer bags, we've got some more ideas here for how to use freezer bags. Some of my patients actually will put their smoothies together. Like for the people who are very, they're just pressed for time. They like to prep like on the weekends and not have to think about it on the mornings. Prepping your smoothies ahead of time, like where you put all the ingredients except for the liquid in an individual baggie. So you can put your fruits and your greens, maybe even the little vegetables like a piece of carrot or a zucchini. You can add your ground flaxseed or your nuts to the bag, maybe some frozen avocado. Some people will even put in their protein powder in there, or a little scoop of peanut butter. But you can basically put the majority of your ingredients. So it is like you've assembled it, but you haven't actually blended it yet. And that's really helpful because then you just grab out the freezer bag, dump it in your blender, add your liquid, blend it up, you're good to go. Rinse out the freezer bag, have it drying during the day for the future use. Same thing for crock pot meals. So I'll actually send you a handout on crock pot meals that are all like planning ahead, where you put the ingredients together in a freezer bag and you just put that whole thing in the freezer. Then you can pull it out, put it in your crock pot. You might add a little broth or something, and then set it for the day, set it and forget it for the day, and then you end up with a meal at the end of the day, and you haven't had to do the prep in the morning. And then I always like to have a random Ziploc bag in the freezer for all those little bits and pieces of things, like when you're chopping and you've got a little leftover onion, or you've got a little leftover parsley, or you've got a piece of celery that's like the last of the bunch, where you can just throw those things into a bag that you're gathering for soups or for making stock in the future. And over time that, adds up, and then you're really using all of the end pieces and reducing your food waste. Any other freezer bag ideas? Are you guys using freezer bags at home? Okay, let's talk about proteins. So, protein used to just spoil. It's like the perfect medium for bacteria and mold to grow. But now with our freezing options and our amazing transportation and refrigeration, we can have all kinds of proteins in all different places, like seafood in the Midwest and really good steak out here. you know, a long ways away from where it was actually raised. One strategy with proteins is to portion them into the portions that you would serve like individually. So like the 4 to 6 ounces, for example, you've probably seen this in the freezer section at your grocery store already, where, you know, they're freezing the salmon fillets, for example, in a 4 ounce fillet, or you've got your burgers, which are 4 ounces, or maybe little steaks that are 4 to 6 ounces. And one of the reasons for that is it is easier to control the temperature. So it will both freeze and thaw easier in smaller portions like that. It also helps you to reduce the food waste because then you're really able to just take out exactly what you need for that meal and thaw just the right amount versus if it was in a big block and then you're having to then thaw it and then maybe it's too much and you try and refreeze it. That freeze thaw cycle is what we want to try and avoid because that's where you're going to get more freezer burn and reduce the quality of the product. So, you know, be careful with that and just um, use your judgment with the portion sizes. But if you can get it into individual portions, that would be great. Some people will use vacuum sealing to do that. Like if you've got that option at home, that's nice because it removes the air and the moisture. And both of those, you know, removing those helps to prevent some of that freezer burn and the changing of the quality of the protein. Alternatively, if you don't have a vacuum seal apparatus at home, you can just basically really tightly wrap the protein in a double layer of plastic and then either use a heavy duty foil, not the, you know, not the really thin stuff, but the heavier foil or like a freezer paper, which they also sell at the grocery store, and wrap it up nice, put it in a freezer bag. We're going to talk about labeling in just a second, but those multiple layers, then you're really preventing that air and moisture and you're keeping it from getting that freezer burn. It'll last a lot longer that way. There is a water method. So the vacuum seal and like the plastic wrap, that's considered a dry method. There are wet methods of preservation, and that would include things like ice glazing. You may have seen this on fish before, where there's like just a little bit of a layer. They basically dip the fish multiple different times and freeze each layer of water in between dipping, so that you've got basically a coating of ice around the fillet that prevents oxygen from getting to it. Or sometimes people will just use complete submersion, where you basically like pack in the fish or pack in the seafood into water. My husband's family did this growing up in remote Alaska, where they would take the shrimp and, you know, just pack it in water itself. So it was a big brick of shrimp in water, which the water then helps to preserve so that you're not getting, you know, oxygen exposure to the protein. And then when you're trying to travel with it, like, you know, when you've got a day of travel to get into a city, that ice pack basically, you know, it helps to preserve and keep it cold longer. So then you can actually transport it as well. However, so even though it helps like prevent that freezer burn and that oxygenation, it can affect the texture of the protein because that water will seep in to especially the fish and can change like the texture of the fish a little bit. So, you know, there's different methods, different ways of thinking about this. If you're trying to do this at home, sometimes it's nice, like if you are doing like a cow share or like a pig share, where you'll actually get it already wrapped from the butcher or from whomever is doing that butchering, and it'll already be like in your little portions. But sometimes you get it home like in a big batch, like if you've been fishing or something, and then you've got to figure out, you know, what to do with all of this protein at one time. So, you know, time matters, how you pack it, and then getting it down to freezing pretty quickly. As far as you know, the timing of that, our freezers that we have, it's fine. Like it's going to get it down to 0. How they do that in industrial settings is much different, and it's very temperature controlled. Actually, like for example, they'll do different things with meats and like steaks to actually make it a little more tenderized, where they control that decrease down to freezing, and they actually slow it down to allow a little bit of enzymatic action to help tenderize the meat. But when you're doing this at home, we just have a freezer to work with, so we're not going to get like super fancy with that. You're just going to put it in the freezer and it's good to go. Okay, so one question that people ask me is like, well, when do I think about getting a deep freeze? Like, when is it the appropriate time to invest in a deep freezer? And the joke is like, it's always, before you need it, right? So like, get one before you really need it, so you have it there. I will say, like, we hadn't thought about it as a family until we moved into a house that already had one. And then we were like, oh, how did we survive without this deep freeze? Because it really just expands your ability to buy in bulk. If you're hunting or fishing, you have that extra space for, the seasonality of that, where you have a lot at once and then you kind of work your way through that over the year. You can then think about things like cow or pig sharing, where you're buying like maybe a quarter of an animal and, getting all of that processed and all of those cuts to you to use for the season or for the year. It just really expands your ability to save for the future. Even things like, harvesting fruits and vegetables. So I grew up in the Midwest, and in the summer, late summer, we would always harvest we wouldn't harvest it, but we would go and get the corn fresh from the field at like 5 in the morning and do several bushels, where we basically like process the corn and then freeze it that day, and then have corn, from our freezer for the rest of the year. So that allows you to like really take advantage of the season and stock up on things when they're either cheaper because they're in season, or maybe they're even on sale in the grocery store because of over purchasing or whatever the situation may be. It allows you to buy in bulk, like at large box stores like Sam's Club and Costco, stocking up during sales, feeding crowds if you have a bunch of mouths to feed, or if you are someone who is like, feeding a lot of people on a regular basis or feeding a lot of pets. That's another time you may want to invest in a deep freezer. If you're living remotely or you have less access to stores. And then if you are someone who wants to get into like prepping and cooking in bulk, this actually can be really helpful for that too, like setting you up for having leftovers. Or like, I think of my grandma, every Christmas she would have her cookie baking season, which was way ahead of Christmas. And you would go to the deep freeze and there's all of the cookies laid out. She had already done it, when it was cheaper and she had more time, and had the ability to kind of stock up on those treats for the season, but she did it way ahead of time. Same thing with like her party mix and her like her cabbage rolls and things like that, where you can make it ahead of time and then enjoy it for months to come, if it lasts that long. Okay, any other thoughts on a deep freeze? Any other reasons to get one, or maybe reasons to not get one? We're going to talk about cost here in just a sec. So let's do a little comparison. So when we talk about like a deep freezer, we're really talking about either like a chest freezer where you open the lid and it's everything, you're kind of like diving into it to get the items out, or a standing freezer. We have a standing or an upright freezer at our house, and I will say from an organization sense, like it's really helpful. We have both racks in the freezer itself and in the door, and that makes it just so easy to quickly see like what is all there. However, the upright freezers tend to be more expensive. So here's kind of a typical range. You can get into a small generic chest freezer for like 150 to 200 bucks. So, they don't have to be super expensive, but it is going to be a little bit smaller. And then I would look for Energy Star appliances, which tend to save you as far as the running costs at least 10%. That's like the standard. It has to be like at least 10% better than the equivalent when it's Energy Star. So a chest freezer is going to cost you about $30 a year to run. for about $2.50 a month. And an upright freezer is about double that. So $60 a year, about $5 a month. So you could definitely, easily save that cost in the running, like electricity costs, with being able to stock up, take advantage of sales, buying in bulk, etc. Chest freezers are different than the freezer that's associated with your refrigerator. So they actually run differently and have much better stability in their temperature. And so that, having that stable temperature is what makes it so that that food lasts longer at better quality. Also, we're not getting into them as much as we kind of open and shut that, the freezer associated with our fridge. They also have a much bigger storage capacity. So yeah, so some things to think about. I will say that from a space situation, a chest freezer takes up a lot of square footage on like a garage floor, for example, whereas the upright freezer takes up more, space vertically and less floor space. And then you have that organizing capability as well. Do check your temperature. If you haven't checked your temperature in your freezer recently, it's a good thing to just double check that it's at 0 or below so that we're, optimizing what it's supposed to be doing, so that you're not having any, food losses like quality, losses, or even spoilage if it's a little too high in temperature. Okay. Hopefully you are using a FIFO method with both your freezer, your refrigerator, and even your pantry, where you're basically like rotating stock. You want to be thinking first in, first out. It doesn't always come down to that exactly, but when you're thinking about a freezer, you're basically going like from the front to the back or back to the front. So you're kind of like rotating things up. Or if it's a chest freezer where you've got that deep capacity, you may need to be bringing things up from the bottom. That's one kind of downside to the chest freezer. They're a little bit more stable in temperature. They've got more storage capacity, but you may be, missing some things down there if you haven't really gotten to the bottom and figured out what's there. This is a good time to do it. It's spring, spring cleaning. Make sure that everything has a label. So not just like what it is and when it went into the freezer, but possibly even how many number of servings it contains. Because if it's like a bag of a sauce or a bag of meat or something, it'd be really nice to know like how many ounces or what the volume is. Because then you can quickly like figure out, is this enough? Do I need to pull out an extra bag? It just really saves you time and stress in the future to label things really well. And then it's nice to keep on the front of the freezer, just keep a running list of what's even in there where you can cross it off once you've used it. And it doesn't have to be fancy. It can simply be a piece of paper where you're just crossing the things off and adding to the list as you add things to the freezer. So then you're really visually seeing what's in there. You don't have to like open the door, stand there and kind of, take an account. You can look at the list, think about your meal planning, and then hopefully that thing really is in the freezer. You want to double check it for sure. But that saves on, the electricity, it saves on, the temperature vacillations when you open that door, and it just saves on your stress and time. So ideally keep a list, especially if you have one of those chest freezers where it is a little harder to see what you have there. Okay. I'm going to share some of my freezer favorites, but I would love to hear your freezer favorites. So put some things in the Q&A as far as what's already in your freezer right now or how you use it. Okay, let's start at the top here. So I mentioned the frozen grains. So you can get like the frozen brown rice, for example, and either cook it in the little microwave pouches that they come in, or just take it out of the pouch if you don't want to microwave it. You can, do it on the stove top or put it into a ceramic or glass bowl with a little sprinkle of water. Or sometimes what I'll do is just like wet a paper towel and put that on top. And so there's a little bit moisture there. and then, finish that 90 seconds in the microwave. That is really handy when you have a night where you're just like, I don't have the time to cook from scratch. So it is still a whole food, but it's been semi-prepped for you. I really like the triple berry mixes. If you don't have berries in your life, this is something to definitely think about. We know from research looking at cardiovascular disease, but also looking at risk of dementia, that berries, particularly that dark blue, purple, red colors, are associated with less risks of dementia and things like heart attack and stroke. So if you can, get some daily berries, daily color, that would be great. And the berries tend to be more of an expensive food that goes bad quickly when it's fresh in the grocery store. So this is a way to get the berries cheaper and have them last a lot longer. Sometimes when they're fresh, what I will do is just like, even when it's like a little bit left, like we're going away for the weekend and there's a handful of blueberries left in the container fresh in the fridge, I'll just throw that in the freezer. Like I might even rinse it and just not worry about freezing it individually. Rinse those berries, throw the whole thing in the freezer because I'm just going to use it in like a smoothie, for example, all together. I'm going to throw the whole thing in a pot of oatmeal or something. So, even if it's just like you're kind of transferring from the fridge and using the freezer for your little bits of leftovers from fresh items, that can be a nice way to go where you're cutting down on your food weight. So don't forget about the freezer in that way too. Okay, couple fish items that are also semi-prepped. So it is like, starts out as pollock in the case of this fish sticks, or starts out as like sockeye or pink salmon in the case of these salmon burgers. What I like about this is they are ready to go. So you don't have to like season them. You don't have to really do anything to them except for bake them. Or in the case of the salmon burger, you can put it on a grill, you can put it in a pan and saute it. But it's a really quick, lean protein option that gets my family excited because everybody loves these. And it gets us eating fish and seafood on, a more regular basis. Both of these you can actually find at Costco. So it's a little bit cheaper as well. What else? The big bags of the broccoli florets. So there's like, small bags within a big bag so that they're a little bit, more portion friendly. You can find these at Costco, but also at like grocery outlet often has these big bags of the smaller bags of organic broccoli florets and other things like California medley, for example. Nowadays, you can find riced veggies like riced cauliflower, riced broccoli. I will often use this in like making use the brown rice and use the rice cauliflower and use the rice broccoli and just make like a stir fry rice, like a quick dinner, saute in some eggs there or maybe some other veggies with it. And you've got a really fast dinner that is mostly vegetable and then whole grain and then a little protein there too. And then I put pizza in here because most people want to have a pizza option in their life. So this is our little trick in order to both save money, but also to kind of control what goes on that pizza. So we really like the cheese pizzas from Kirkland. It comes in a 4-pack and it's basically like $3 a pizza. It's amazing. It's like 12 bucks for the whole box. So you cannot beat the price on that. They are, oh gosh, 10 inches maybe 11 inches or so across. So they're not huge. So it does help with portion control. They're tasty. They're really basic when you look at the ingredients of what's in there. I will say they are a little salty, so you're going to want to pair it with some veggies on top, ideally, and maybe a salad with it. But it's a really great base, especially if you've got multiple different people in the family, different tastes, different preferences. You've got maybe some picky eaters where they can build their own pizza, do their own toppings. They cook really fast. And when you have that pizza craving, it really saves you from like going out and getting a fancy thing that costs 10 times as much. So we keep those around as, plan C or plan D in our lives. And then the bottom one here in the corner, the Tortilla Land tortillas. I don't know if you guys have seen these yet, but they are uncooked tortillas. There's only 5 ingredients in them, so they don't have all of the extra preservatives. So that the ones that are sitting on the shelf, all those things are added so that they can last a long time without molding, right? So it's, trying to reduce food waste. But I really like these because you keep them in the freezer or the fridge. So you move them from the freezer, thaw them in the fridge, and then from there you basically just dry pan cook them, and you have fresh tasting tortillas. Like truly, they taste absolutely freshly made. And like it says on the package here, it cooks in 60 seconds. So that's what we often use for like breakfast burritos or for like our fish tacos where we use the fish sticks or like the salmon burgers. And it's not a whole grain, it is a refined flour, but I like that it's just the 5 ingredients and it tastes amazing. So those are some of our favorites. Let me see if there's any favorites in the Q&A from you guys. No. Okay. Any questions? Any freezer questions? Do you guys have a deep freeze at home? Are you using it? Or do you feel like maybe you don't need it? Sometimes, depending on your situation in life, you might not need it at some point, right? If you are now cooking for one, maybe you really don't need all that space. You might adjust your thoughts on it. Okay. Great. We've got plenty of time left. I do want to mention our class coming up next week, or next month. So we're doing this series monthly every 4th Tuesday of the month. In the month of May on the 27th, we're going to be talking about batch prepping and cooking. So look out for that. Get registered for that class. After today, I'm going to send you a few recipes, so be on the lookout for that. And then hopefully we'll see you maybe at a future, in-person class in the teaching kitchen. And it looks like if there's no other questions, we'll end a little early today. Enjoy the weather, enjoy your freezer. Hopefully you guys got some good tips and tricks, and I'll see you next month, hopefully. Okay. Bye-bye.